Welcome to the Business Channel in association with UK Trade and Investment. Today we're at the Brazilian Embassy in London to find out how this South American country has had an extraordinary decade and it's about to have another one. Back in 2001, when it became one of the BRIC countries, many questioned whether it should actually be included as one of the world's leading growth markets. Not now. Helped by economic reform, political stability, vast resources and a youthful population of 190 million, growth has powered ahead. Over the last 10 years, the country's output has quadrupled. No one is expecting that to slow down anytime soon, particularly as the World Cup in Rio is just around the corner, followed by the Olympics in 2016. Well, we're in good company because this is the gallery of previous Brazilian ambassadors to London, all people who've done much to foster good relations between the two countries. Now, by some estimates, within a generation, the Brazilian economy will grow five-fold. The question is how to put in place all of the technology, creativity, design, know-how and finance to make that happen. In this programme, we'll look at the scale and extent of the changes that are happening in Brazil and report on how Britain can contribute to that growth.
What's going on in Brazil and the scale of the change is enormous. This is a large country anyway, of course, a market of nearly 200 million people. It's a market that's seen considerable growth in recent years. It's very well endowed with natural resources, both in terms of oil and gas and agribusiness, all sorts of natural resources. And so this is a country that's going to do well over the next generation. And this creates a huge market opportunity.
Well, Brazil has undergone major changes over the past many years. And these changes are of a different nature: an institutional change with the strengthening of the democratic process, a growth of the economy, which is now the sixth largest in the world, and perhaps more importantly, a change in the internal social pattern of the country with the incorporation of close to 50 million Brazilians into the middle class. This presents enormous opportunities for business and for increased cooperation between the two countries in several different sectors.
In consumer markets, we see a lot of these people consuming new products. They buy new cars, they buy houses, they consuming more food and drinks. And then that all obviously replicates to industrial markets because also these people are consuming products which needs the industries to be manufacturing more and more. And Brazil has a big manufacturing base, so it's also boosts the industrial production.
Well, I think the first thing important to highlight is that the Brazilian economy is a highly diversified economy. It's, some people think that Brazil is only about commodities and agribusiness, but Brazil has a very strong and a very wide manufacturing sector. Brazil is a large producer of things like computers and aircrafts. And of course the traditional manufacturing sector, shoes, clothes, all those things. And Brazil also has a very dynamic service sector too, in telecommunications, broadcasting, internet things. The Brazilian population now, almost 40% of the population have access to internet connection, so this makes this broad market, broad new market. Historically, the development, the industrialization in Brazil was led by the state. This was a very important pattern, and in the past we used to have a large number of state-owned companies. Most of those companies were privatized in some 20 years ago. But still today I would say the state plays a very important role in regulating and financing the economic growth.
Brazil is an exciting opportunity for British companies, actually for foreign companies in general. It's difficult to summarize all the reasons why we are so attractive these days, but I think it starts in the 90s with the stabilization of the currency, with the privatization program. Following the 90s, Brazil has been put in the big league by the Goldman Sachs economist Jim O'Neill with the creation of the concept of BRIC, of the BRIC countries. We are together with China, India and Russia there. And the perception from outside changed a lot regarding Brazil. In the last 12 years, Brazil more than quadruple the size of the GDP. The Brazilian GDP today is about the size of the UK GDP. The business climate in Brazil has improved a lot. 12 years ago, the prime Brazilian interest rate was 15%. These days, the rate is 7.5% and going down. Last year, total imports were $226 billion. So that means a lot of opportunities for trading in Brazil. And Brazil is member of Mercosur. Mercosur is the fourth largest market in the world today. Also, I think we have to mention the Brazilian capital markets, which is very strong. It's the largest in Latin America by far. And the new rules introduced over the last few years have sophisticated the market and increased the corporate governance of Brazilian companies. So foreigners wanting to invest or to joint venture in Brazil can also get this benefit of these sophisticated capital markets.
As buyers, Brazilians are looking to upgrade their lifestyles, their infrastructure and their industry. But what are the terms on which Brazilians usually prefer to trade? And how open is Brazil to forming British partnerships with British institutions and companies?
Well, I think they are utterly open. The Brazilian economy became much more open than it was today in terms of the volume of trade with the international market and of investments. There are many Brazilian companies becoming multinationals today, and the Brazilian government is supporting this movement. So I think nowadays the Brazilian economy is becoming more accessible for non-Brazilians. It's becoming more globalized.
The UK has a long-standing tradition in Brazil. British companies have been there for many years. And I know that it is the interest also of the UK government to increase the exports to Brazil. And I think there is room for doing this because the amount of British exports into Brazil is still low compared with other countries in Europe, like Germany, for instance, and is also low by comparison with the United States. So I see many good prospects for British companies both investing or trading and exporting to Brazil in the near future.
I think this is the main piece of advice, and I think it is true not just in Brazil, in all the major emerging economies. They are not interested in buying. They're interested in creating solid partnerships that would allow them to develop technology and industry by themselves with the support from countries that are already more mature, such as the UK. This is very much true in Brazil, although it doesn't mean there are not many important opportunities for just selling. There are also many opportunities. But I think you should seek, first of all, to establish a good, sound relationship and seek partnerships.
Strengthening the flow of business between Britain and Brazil is, first of all, it's a very important objective for us. This is such a big market. We want to make sure that we showcase what Britain has to offer as effectively as we can. It's about a variety of things. The government engaging with the government at both ends. The development of groups of British businesses whom we support visiting Brazil so that they can market their products and services. Just generally encouraging more and more British businesses to get out to Brazil and see the way in which the country is changing and developing.
Growth is more than a headline figure in Brazil. Indicators on the ground such as startups, foreign investment, order books and development in outlying regions are all advancing quickly.
Lots of British companies are looking at trading and investing in Brazil because Brazil has experienced incredible growth over recent years, and it also has a very stable political and economic environment. Brazil has a wealth of industries to invest in, and its natural resource sector and infrastructure are very underdeveloped. This means that there is plenty of opportunity for skilled British companies to add value in Brazil, It is not surprising that foreign investment in Brazil has doubled in the last 5 years.
Brazil has a very vibrant business environment which consists of SMEs and large corporates operating across a wide range of business sectors. Just to put this into perspective, between January and July 2012, over 1 million companies were incorporated in Brazil.
I don't believe any market in the world is the preserve of large companies. The right kind of qualities and talents within a smaller business will always do reasonably well within a market wherever it is. Secondly, we have actually evidence of smaller companies being able to do business in Brazil. Our first trade mission to Brazil was in October of last year, and in fact, since we went with 10 businesses to the marketplace, 4 of them have actually done business directly as a result of that mission, and of course they were all SMEs, and 2 of them have made subsequent visits to the market, and 2 more of them are coming with us this year to Brazil again.
Location-wise, the southeastern region is the main destination of foreign direct investments in the country. Now, overseas investors are exploring opportunities in other regions and also setting up their footprints in other states. An example of that is the northeastern region, where basically it has been growing its GDP at Chinese rates and now is one of the most attractive places to invest in Latin America. Likewise, the central region of Brazil has also experienced the highest growth rates in the number of companies incorporated in 2012, which represents an uplift of around 8% in relation to 2011. The combination of all these factors represent a huge opportunity for SMEs willing to invest in Brazil.
I think exporting to any new market and an emerging market is always going to create some challenges. I mean, that's an inevitability. I think from our point of view, we would also recommend to customers to take some independence advice. I mean, our own experience with our partners on the ground, we've got a lot of people talking to us now about moving products in, and we've seen 22.5% growth in the business this year into Brazil and South America, and not just from the UK, but also from China and the USA. And what we're seeing now in Brazil already is an extension from moving just product into the market, but also offering on-ground logistics services. So we've had a huge investment in terms of on-ground warehouse and distribution solutions too.
Well, clearly Brazil is a very vibrant economy. It's doing very well. We're seeing a lot of our international client base. We work with Fortune 500 companies, FTSE 250 companies. We're seeing a lot of those companies looking or already taking up presence in Brazil, and we're keen to be able to travel with those companies and provide them with the services that we're already providing elsewhere in the world.
Certainly within Brazil, as I say, we've been there for over 10 years now, so it's all growth. Maybe some of the froth has come off that market if you read the financial press, but certainly, for example, we've taken on extra salespeople there. And so we're seeing it as a growth market, which from our perspective sort of mitigates some of the flatness in other markets.
Brazil is the 2nd largest economy in the BRICS and now the 6th largest in the world. It's generating opportunities for business right across the commercial spectrum.
I think the opportunities for British business lie in a number of sectors in Brazil. The oil and gas sector, of course, given what's going on in the offshore deep water drilling opportunity, in financial services, in the sports industry, of course, given the commitment to host the World Cup in 2014 and the Olympics in 2016. There's a major opportunity there. In the fashion industry. I mean, it's a very broad-based market with a lot of appetite for branded international goods. And what they see in Britain is a country with a very high degree of technological expertise, quality products, high degree of creativity, and they like the way British companies do the business. So we're very welcome there.
Manufacturing is still an area where we need a lot of investment and a lot of technological input. I think infrastructure is particularly important. I think logistics are an area where British expertise is very well defined. And also the financing, the mechanisms that create the financing engineering for a number of infrastructural products in Brazil is something that the city can do very well. And we hope to witness an increased participation of this in Brazil as well. There has always been a very good relationship between the UK and Brazil. It used to be very intense, but it ceased to be intense. But now it's picking up significantly. Brazil was a major destination of UK investment. It has now begun to be a major destination again. The opportunities for many UK firms in the energy sector, in the banking sector, in the education sector, in the innovation sector are very much present. And there's a big effort on the part of government as well to make sure that business in the UK is aware of that.
Like any diversified economy that Brazil is, then there are a number of sectors. We would be able to help people in pretty much any sector. I think mining is a particularly strong one there, but financial services would be a good example that we could help with. But there's no real particular limits to that, I would say.
I mean, for us in Brazil in particular, we've seen a huge explosion in pharmaceuticals, healthcare and the high-tech division. I mean, to that extent, we've just put an implant into one of our customers' factories to manage the flow of inbound and finished products as well. And again, I think, as we said, there's a huge dynamic economy in Brazil. So we're seeing growth from many sectors now, both outbound and inbound, and both the small and large customers too.
Yes, and I think again with P&O Ferrymasters' scope within Europe, looking after a number of sectors, we see a potential with any one of those sectors, so not just the pharmaceutical or the high tech. And again, we're offering this level of expertise that this alliance brings to serve all of those sectors.
The Brazilian economy is also becoming more intensive in the service sectors, all of them, which again makes the British companies very competitive. So telecommunications, broadcasting, everything relating to internet, games, and I think the British culture is very strong on these sectors, and I think the consumers in Brazil recognize a lot the British products, music, movies. So I think there is a huge road to go here for British people.
Do the Brazilians have any particularly different buying patterns or buying habits?
So typically, one example might be that where landlines and telephony have not been as good as one might hope, mobile technology has all leapfrogged that. So there's a quite high penetration of that, which for example means that Brazilians are crazy about using social media. And the joke in our office is that we know more about what our team over there do in their daily lives than we do about our own families. So there's that kind of aspect to things that you need to be aware of. But also the other thing is the different channels through which you might sell the products. And again, that can vary from country to country. It certainly is different there as well. And that's something we can advise on as well.
I think there'll be a focus on those sectors which are inherently part of the Brazilian economy. Oil and gas would be a very obvious one to talk about. There will be some quite considerable opportunities for companies in the environmental technologies sector, low carbon technologies and things like this. And also, of course, because one of the major challenges facing Brazil is infrastructure. So companies who support infrastructure, whether it's road and rail, or indeed telecoms or energy or even health infrastructure, there will be opportunities in those sectors. And of course, there are both large companies and SMEs in the UK in all of those sectors. So we'll be looking at the opportunities for them.
Brazil's gains in living standards and commercial performance depend upon designing and engineering a competitive infrastructure. Billions have been invested in transport and communication, opening up contracts throughout the country. In the state of Sao Paulo alone, $20 billion worth of PPP, that's public-private partnership infrastructure contracts, have been presented to British potential contractors.
Recently, President Dilma announced plans for a very heavy investment programme in infrastructure right across the country, in roads, in rail, in airports and in ports. And I think for businesses in the UK who have traditionally worked the sort of triangle of investment between Sao Paulo, Rio and to some extent Belo Horizonte in the southeast of the country, some of these infrastructure projects are going to be way outside of this zone. And doing business in these areas in a small town in the northeast is very, very different than doing business in Sao Paulo or Rio.
Brazil is investing a lot in infrastructure now because, well, the economy has been growing and we have the next World Cup will be in Brazil, the next Olympic Games will be in Brazil. So Brazilian government is doing a lot of investments in trains and roads, and I think the British companies have a lot to do and to say on these sectors.
By hosting the World Cup in 2014 and the Olympics in 2016, Brazil is creating in quick succession facilities for the two biggest events in sport and opening up many opportunities through the supply chain.
I think that hosting the World Cup and the Olympics is a huge commitment for Brazil in general and Rio de Janeiro in particular. The opportunity to engage and help British companies engage, particularly as we come out of the experience of running the Olympics ourselves. We have a host of British companies who have developed an expertise in complex international sporting events that we now want to make sure is marketed around the world, actually, of course, but there's no place that's more important in the near and medium term than Brazil because of the World Cup and the Olympics.
Now, how well advanced are Brazil's plans for the Olympics and the World Cup, and how can British firms contribute to the success of those events?
Well, first of all, you have had, as everybody knows, a very successful Olympic Games here in London, and they were successful from every point of view, successful from the logistic point of view, which is very, let's say, similar. The challenges of the Olympics are relatively similar in each country. Then you add local flavor and a number of things to make it different. But many of these venues in Brazil are already there, ready, so we don't have to build many things. For the World Cup, there's a complete revamping of the major stadiums and the construction of new stadium. I think everything is going well. There is a challenge in relation to transportation, a challenge in relation to airports, and to logistics. And many British firms are already taking part in the bidding processes that lead to contracts both for the World Cup and for the Olympic Games.
A project of the size of the World Cup or the Olympic and Paralympic Games is a huge project, and for an SME to engage with a project of that size requires a particular approach, I think, really, and that approach is wrapped around finding out who the Tier 1, Tier 2 and Tier 3 contractors will be, because it's highly unlikely that unless very, very specialist, an SME will get direct access to major contracts on a project like that. However, for example, I think the average size of contracts on the Olympic Games, other than the Tier 1 major ones, was around £20,000. So there's an opportunity there for smaller businesses to do business which is accessible and profitable.
Well, it's clearly a great opportunity for Brazil construction companies to demonstrate their skill sets. It's going to be a world stage. For us, our interest clearly is identifying partners, local partners that we can work with, and we can bring some of the knowledge that we've gained and the experience that we've gained in London 2012. We physically built the Velodrome, one of the most successful venues, over 20 international awards. Following on from that, we were granted the overlay contract for all of the facilities. Now, the overlay means effectively making every single facility games ready. So that means putting in temporary stadium, temporary accesses. We constructed the largest dining hall for the athletes, the largest McDonald's in the world, a number of items, clearly working on 78 venues across the country. They are complex projects. And one of the key lessons is about collaboration. It's really about all working together, embracing the spirit, because the one thing that cannot move is the event dates themselves. The event dates are fixed. You have to deliver to those dates.
In offshore oil and gas, one of Britain's long-standing areas of strength, hundreds of billions of dollars are being invested over the next 5 years in Brazil.
At the moment, there's a huge pull around Rio de Janeiro. This is around the pre-salt exploration areas that have been discovered. There are huge opportunities, not just for the exploration companies, but for businesses that are involved right through the whole supply chain. To put this into context, Petrobras, the Brazilian state-owned oil company, has invested or committed to invest $236 billion over the next 5 years. If you pool this with the investment that is forecasted for other businesses within this supply chain, that's looking to top 400 billion US dollars.
Well, there are lots of opportunities for medium-sized and smaller companies as well. If you think of the oil and gas sector, for example, the deep sea opportunity that exists offshore from Brazil now is one which plays to the strengths of British companies engaged in the North Sea. We have world-class experience of dealing with deep sea technology, and this is very often quite small companies.
Brazil's ambition to become as sophisticated and competitive as any other leading economy depends heavily on building up its knowledge base. So what is the scope for increasing collaboration with universities internationally to educate students and capitalise on research?
The potential is amazing because the education has been increasing a lot in Brazil, basic education, and particularly the number of people attending higher education has increased dramatically in the last year. So we have now a total of 6.5 million higher education students. And also the Brazilian government has been expanding a lot the expenses of money to students, giving tuitions and scholarships to students to go abroad and take their degrees. King's College, for instance, have been signing many different agreements with with the best universities in Brazil, and also with the public agencies that fund this kind of relationship.
We say at King's that we're interested in researching with Brazil and not just on Brazil. And one of the things that's happened in the last few years is the research councils in the UK have signed an agreement with the Research Council in the state of Sao Paulo to jointly fund research. And this research doesn't have to be on Brazil, it can be basic science, engineering. And we're seeing a lot of researchers here in the UK sort of apply for that funding. And at the college level, at the King's College level, we were the first British university to sign a similar agreement with FAPESP, the Research Council in Sao Paulo. And we've had 3 waves of teams of researchers applying for funding to research together.
Brazil might seem distant, large and complicated, but business is becoming easier to conduct, even for smaller companies. So how do you get yourself up and running when you arrive?
If you want a serious opportunity to gain serious business in Brazil, first of all, you have to think long term. This isn't going to happen overnight. Secondly, you probably need to work with partners. In many cases, it's better to work with a partner as you develop the business. And thirdly, you've got to get out and around the country, and it's a very large country. So you do need to think big, but you've got to be realistic. This is a commitment and a journey for most companies going into the market, which will require investment of time and effort and a long-term focus.
Brazil is a little bit off the beaten path for many people in the UK. They're more familiar with countries where there's been a historic tie involving formal colonization, for example, India or Anglophone Africa. The language can be a barrier for some people. Portuguese is not often studied, as far as I know, not taught at all in secondary schools in the UK, so that's a bit of a barrier. And I would say, especially in the scientific community, English is the lingua franca, and so the language barriers are not as great in those disciplines as they are, say, in some of the others.
So the first thing very clearly is that companies should avail themselves of the knowledge about the market in Brazil, which enables them to make a conscious and confident decision about whether or not Brazil is the right market for them, because it's not the right market for absolutely everybody. For whom it is the right market, the opportunities are enormous. Secondly, the skills, and this is not just the skills inside the business, in making and producing what they deliver, whether product or service, but also skills in terms of marketing, in managing operations internationally, and those other things which are required of any multinational or internationally trading business. And then the third thing, of course, is the attitude, and this is where we, as part of the Breakthrough Programme, try to work with businesses to engage them in a way that generates confidence from them in their ability to trade internationally, and then helps them acquire the competence, which reinforces that confidence in doing business in the market.
A common question that we get asked on a number of occasions from UK businesses is, what are the most obvious pitfalls that we need to avoid if we're going to look to do business in Brazil? One of our roles as a professional services company is to provide advice and help businesses with those challenges. An obvious one for me, and one that I guess really crystallised, was during my time in Brazil. I think UK companies can approach the Brazilian market and not appreciate how important trust is in terms of relationships and doing business in Brazil. In the UK, we talk about trust a lot, certainly in professional services. It's not that obvious in Brazil, but the trust element and the interpersonal relationship between the stakeholders of various businesses is very, very important. The other important factors about doing business in Brazil that UK businesses need to appreciate revolve around things like culture and the wider Latino culture that exists within Brazil, and that can be different between states. So Sao Paulo, for example, very, very hard-working, they work long hours, incredibly professional and pride themselves on that. In Rio, equally professional, but the balance of work and life in terms of what they do at the weekend versus what they do during the week is different.
We take it for granted that you can move products very easily within Europe, but the same cannot be said for moving products globally, let alone we're talking specifically about Brazil. And yes, that is a very challenging part of the supply chain that the client has to get ready.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the most important things in a new market is understand who you're doing business with, understand the expectations of your customer from the very start, as much research as you can possibly do. I mean, in terms of Brazil, documentation is incredibly important to get right. Any mistakes can cause delays at customs borders that can generate additional expense as well, which obviously anyone would want to avoid. Packaging, I mean, again, I would say that, make the packaging as robust as anybody sensibly can. Whether it's moving by air or ocean, there are hazards there. You need to protect the freight as much as you can, as well as understanding with the customer the insurance, so understanding the trading terms and conditions that you've entered into, and therefore where your liabilities start and end and where you've got to insure the product too.
It's important to think about the ways in which this is going to be funded or the credit insurance provided. And what we have in the government stable is UK Export Finance, which exists in order to provide the guarantee support for a market like Brazil, an emerging market. We have significant cover available for Brazil. We have a credit line that was negotiated with Petrobras specifically for the oil and gas sector. And therefore, the opportunity to de-risk the decision financially is there. And working with banks, UKEF is very willing to engage with companies as they seek to find the finance to support their business opportunity as they go to Brazil.
In a way, there are three areas which affect trade or the ability of a business to trade. The first is what I might call border in, which is their ability here in the UK to make themselves capable of doing international trade. The second one would be border out, which is outside the UK border, the things which are done in the marketplace, say this in this case in Brazil, which facilitate that trade to happen, whether it is making of appointments or market reports or whatever it is. And then there's the things which happen on the border. These are things like regulation, tariff barriers and stuff like that. We are very keen to work with, and we do work with, chambers of commerce, including international chambers of commerce, business groups, support groups for companies around, I suppose, representation to government about the sort of barriers that exist for businesses, whether it be double taxation agreements or non-tariff barriers or that sort of thing around the world. And because obviously Brazil is a market which has regulations attached to it, we would be very keen to continue working with the UK government on opening up the market for business both in Brazil and Brazilian business in the UK.
If organisations can build alliances on the ground and bring the right people into their teams, they can improve their chances of plugging themselves into the local supply chains.
It's important to understand that doing business in Brazil is more about partnership than about seeking a customer. You have to seek partners and not customers. Sometimes you're going to find customers, but you have to try to seek partners, an alliance. Building in Brazil, investing in Brazil, selling from the UK, sending things from the UK, but also building a cooperation and a partnership. And that is also true for smaller companies. They have to engage in the local market, they have to engage in the specific sectors and find appropriate partners to do business in Brazil.
We have to work with local partners, local supply chains, and each of those geographies has their own nuance. So we need both the local suppliers and effectively we bring the consistency and knowledge of our international clients. Our experience as we've travelled overseas from the UK before is that one has to have a detailed understanding and knowledge of that local supply chain. That's what's key to providing the end product, which is why we work with local industry and effectively local construction companies that have the direct access to that supply chain.
Brazil has a large population, people know that. But one thing that surprises UK businesses sometimes is actually the availability of talent. And this is not just talent at a senior professional level, this is talent right the way through the workforce. The Brazilian economy is growing at record levels, and the demand to get the right people to the right jobs in the right places is incredibly difficult, and that does remain a challenge for businesses going forward.
So what could go wrong and where could complications occur? Well, you have to make sure that you're asking the right questions about the framework you choose for running your business.
There are risks for British companies investing in Brazil. It can be an incredibly challenging environment. Most sectors are incredibly heavily regulated and the tax system is incredibly complex. When you add to this a relatively high proportion of litigation, both from the government and commercially, with a court system that can be frustratingly slow and complex, it is not surprising that we recommend that any company wanting to do business in Brazil seeks out the very best legal and tax advice. It is only by listening to these experts that you can hope to navigate successfully your investment in Brazil.
There is sometimes a gap in Brazil between the formal rules, whatever those may be, and the way things actually work. And I think people need to have a bit of flexibility and a bit of patience to deal with those kinds of hiccups.
Brazil is still a very bureaucratic country. So there are a number of registrations, the tax system is complicated. So anyone interested in investing or trading with Brazil has to investigate, the best structure, the best tax planning available. And for that purpose, I think it's important to count on both foreign and local advisors to get the best solution for all the bureaucracy in Brazil.
It's also important to understand the tax regime in Brazil. Historically, this has been a bit of a barrier to businesses entering into the country. It is complex. The devil is in the detail.
An average company spends about 1280 hours per year to comply with taxes in Brazil. In the US and other markets and the UK, it's more around 200 hours. So it's to do business in Brazil, it's let's say it's more than 10 times more time consuming in terms of taxes than in the UK or in the US, for example.
That said, however, the government is looking at simplifying certain areas of the tax legislation to make it more attractive for overseas investors to come into the country. Other things businesses need to be aware of, SMEs up to medium-sized companies, is corporate governance. Corporate governance has changed, the landscape has changed, certainly in the past 5 to 10 years, with businesses taking a particular attitude to this, which is far more prudent than it's ever been before.
Brazil is now in the mainstream for business everywhere, so businesses can draw on numerous sources of information to explore the market and pick up opportunities.
It's wise to take advice, to take some guidance. That's what UK Trade and Investment is there for. They are there to help de-risk the decision, help you find the way forward, help you take be aware of the pitfalls, and in any country that you're not familiar with, there'll be some pitfalls. It's important to be aware of those. That's what UK Trade and Investment is there for, to put you in touch with the right kinds of support. Often that's finance. In many cases, it makes sense to think in terms of forming a partnership in the local market, in Brazil in this case. Again, UKTI is there to help you find the right kind of partner. We have a significant trade promotion sector which is open to all inquiries. We have a network with information available in the net, Brazil Trade Net, which is something very, very simple, and where we will identify potential partners and potential buyers of British goods and services as well. There's an enormous market for services, including services in education, as I said. So it's all very simple, and there's a big unit at our embassy allocated to helping interests and providing, let's say, bridges between Brazil and the UK. Of course, UKTI and the participation of the British representations in Brazil, the consulates and the embassy, are also very important in this respect.
Well, we began the MA Brazilian Global Perspective last year, and we offer courses on contemporary Brazil. We provide internship opportunities for our students as well. And this year we have a cohort of students from Europe, Brazil, United States, all of them interested in doing a research project on some aspect of contemporary social, economic, political issues. And we expect that those students will go out then after this year of the MA and do something Brazil related, whether it's for an NGO, a government, or business. And we're very excited about keeping in touch with our students and finding out what those experiences will be in the years to come.
Santander UK clearly take an interest in the bank's operations in Brazil because it represents a potentially major market for our company clients here in the UK. And that's one of the reasons why, as part of the Breakthrough Programme, we are arranging trade missions from the UK to Brazil every year to enable companies and to assist companies in actually making the most of that major market.
How do people buy products there, particularly products I'm looking to sell there? So that's where we survey the market, typically through online questionnaires, and we give you, statistically valid material that can help you to formulate your strategy. Significantly, if you're not too used to that market, I can tell you that we're using a methodology which is used in other countries as well. So you can kind of validate it against other markets perhaps you're more familiar with, like Europe, and you say, okay, well, they do this there that's different, that's interesting, this will help us with our strategy. So that's kind of a key thing there, I think.
So it's this kind of market intelligence that's really crucial, is it, when people are breaking into Brazil?
It certainly is, and obviously you want to know what the end consumer's preferences are, but of equal importance is the business landscape. Are you going through a wholesaler? Does it make any sense to sell through an e-commerce channel? Possibly not, because people don't have broadband. So these are factors you need to consider when you choose your channel to market in Brazil.
I think with our partners and the experience that we've got, we're always happy to give people guidance. We can help them as much as we can to understand the challenges and the pitfalls of importing and exporting. Again, we would always recommend people to take professional independent advice. The UKTI, for example, offer a wide range of opportunities for people to understand the challenges of importing and exporting to countries. In terms of the physical movement, be it by air or ocean, absolutely we're well placed to help. And again, if there's an on-ground requirement in Brazil with distribution and storage, we're very well placed to help.
Brazil might formerly have been dubbed a country of the future, never quite realising its potential, but now it's a market that's come into the light and is fast becoming one of the most exciting stories in world growth.
What we think that we can do is introduce people to these changes that Dr. Comín was talking about, the urbanization, the embrace of technology, the manufacturing, and show that Brazil is confronting a number of challenges that are actually quite similar to the kinds of challenges you see in China and India, and actually dialoguing with people in those countries is very much a part of the process by which Brazilians are now engaging in solutions or looking for solutions to those problems. So I think if we can do that well, we can get people away from the stereotypes of Brazil as a very sleepy, coffee growing country with beaches in which there's not a lot going on and not a lot of international engagement. In fact, there's a tremendous amount of international engagement now and tremendous changes.
The evidence is that companies that think carefully about this find there is a very big prize there, so long as they're prepared to make the longer term commitment, to invest the time and effort into understanding the market that they're getting into. It's a fascinating market. It's fast changing, it's great fun, it's very resilient, there's a lot of potential in it, and so is it worth taking the risk of the first step? It absolutely is.
Well, that's all we've got time for in this programme, but if you'd like to find out more about any of the organisations that we featured, then visit our website, thebusinesschannel.tv. Bye-bye for now.